Welcome back to another episode of the Fundamental Frequency Podcast. Today I have Eileen Day McKusick on the show. Welcome, Eileen. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks. Great to be here.
I was so stoked to get a response from you to come on the show, and I'm very grateful because you have such an amazing modality that you've created, and I think it's so relevant in our time at the moment for people trying to heal and come back to a place of wholeness. If we can just jump in straight away, I've heard you speak before and give a nice definition of what sound actually is, and I think we're moving towards a more holistic idea of what sound is, including audible hearing sound in the spectrum of electromagnetism, because it interacts with electromagnetism very well, and you can see that through your work. If you could give us a definition of sound, that would be awesome.
Well, in my first book, Tuning the Human Biofield, I talk about how sound has two definitions. And one is sound that we can hear, that's in the audible range of human hearing, which is about 20 to 20,000 hertz. And another is transmitted vibrations of any frequency. So that would mean from the lowest of the low, in a cosmic scale, waves that are light years across, or in the micro, the incredibly high ones, right? And technically you can keep going higher and higher, and you can keep going lower and lower, right? And that's the
Yeah,
nature of infinity. So really, when you get to that, it's like every single propagated wave, whether we call it light, whether we call it sound, whether we call it X-rays, whatever label we put on the spectrum, it's basically all just moving waves, traveling waves.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I like how you made a reference to infinite harmonics there, because a lot of people don't understand that you have a fundamental tone and then there's infinite harmonics in both directions. And they're all influencing the environment or the physiology depending on what's going on. But yeah, it's such an important thing to define sound in that way. Do you I've seen both explanations where sound is included, like audible sound is included on the spectrum of electromagnetism, and then sometimes it's not. What is your what do you think? Do you think it should be included, or do you think there's a holistic view?
Part of the reason why there's a struggle around it has to do with the differentiation that's created
Mm,
between light and sound.
mm,
And so we've been told, most of us learned, that space is an empty vacuum.
mm,
And so since there used to be a perception of the ether, of the luminiferous ocean of clear light that waves propagated through, and that's what we call light, this wave movement of waves through the ether. But the ether was taken out of our cosmology and replaced with nothing. And so then we're told that light can propagate through nothing, that light can propagate through a vacuum. The movement of the waves of light doesn't need a medium. I mean,
mm.
but what is a wave but traveling through a medium,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we're told that sound needs a medium to propagate through. And so that differentiates it from light, right?
Mm,
But if you put the medium back in there, the ether,
mm,
whether we call it light, whether we call it sound, whether we call it music,
mm.
it's all traveling waves through the ether that creates a dielectric property, the up and the down and the spiral and the polarity of masculine and feminine, positive and negative, that gets
Yeah,
created.
yeah, yeah.
So from that perspective, sound is absolutely part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Everything is part of the electromagnetic spectrum because everything is light. Everything is ether that through torsion spins itself into what we call plasma, and then that will spin into what we call gases, and it precipitates down into what we call matter. But essentially, it's all spun light. It's all the movement of waves through the ether.
Mm. Yeah, beautiful description. And I I wanted you to define that because I'm always harping on about how it should be included, or that it is, yeah, that the ether is it's like a substance that we're immersed in, and yeah, we need nothing can move through, nothing can move without having a medium to go through. So yeah, the physicists of the 19th century were onto this, and then we threw it out. not so long ago, but it seems like we're having a journey back to embracing that again, because we're seeing that there's too much separation between, like, we segregate all these things, and then and then you have a practice like you do, and it's like, okay, why are these two things interacting? Oh, well, because they're not separate.
Exactly. And that was what led me to my understanding of that was in my early practice with the tuning forks.
Mm,
When I would activate a tuning fork and move it around
mm,
somebody's body, I
mm,
would find areas where there was like what felt like magnetic resistance, like the feeling when you put two magnets together and that kind of resistance feeling. And
mm,
I'd find these areas that felt like little magnetic blobs. And I discovered that I could like stick a fork in these blobs and I could move them.
mm.
And so if somebody was having pain off of this shoulder, I'd be like, wow, you got one of those blobs there. And I'd come in the fork and I would just move it to the midline. And then it wouldn't be blobby over there and it would sound stronger here. And then they didn't have pain anymore. And
Yeah.
so I was like, okay, what is this blob that I'm moving? And what law of physics is dictating that a vibrating tuning fork can move it? Right? It was
Mm.
very puzzling. I was like, what's going on here?
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I guess though, and then you went on the journey of unpacking, like, and understanding what was happening. So when was that? When was the first time you had, like, found some tuning forks and then started to play with them? And, like, where were you at the time? From reading your book, I know that you're a massage therapist, and then you started to integrate uh, your tuning forks into it. But yeah, what's the story leading up to that, and what compelled you to use them?
I started a restaurant with my family when I was 20.
Well, yeah.
And and when we started, we had 16 seats, and it was my mom and my two older brothers. And within 4 years, we had tripled the size of the dining room, doubled the size of the kitchen. We had 90 seats inside, we had 50 seats outside, we had 32 employees, and I was practically dead. I was just, I had worked 100-hour weeks. I had slaved
Wow.
in that kitchen over mop buckets, over sandwich bars, over dish sinks, over cleaning toilets, like the whole, it
We've all
was
been
really,
there. We've all been.
yeah, it was, and really, my back was, I was in so much back pain. I had really bad TMJ. I'd get like these shooting pains through my head, and I just felt like burnt toast inside. I was completely empty and really just needed to do something different.
Mm,
And so I I'd gotten interested in health and human potential and like science and spirituality. I starting when I was 18, I started kind of went on a quest and started reading like Carlos Castaneda and Tony Robbins and
yeah.
things like that. And and discovered in the process of that. And I was interested in that because I was addicted to sugar, which
Yeah.
is a very bad thing to be when you're in a cafe with incredibly good baked goods
Yeah.
and stress and family.
All the liver pacifiers.
Yeah, all the liver pacifiers,
Yeah.
and I really was so tied up in the stress and the addiction, and I really wanted to figure out how to heal myself, how to be in control
Yeah.
of what I was putting in my mouth. I think so many people struggle with that, right? It's just it's like something that should be simple. It's simple for animals in the wild to just find the right food and eat it when they're hungry and stop when they're full. But our food environment has become so artificial and abundant, especially here in the first world, that it's an extremely challenging territory to navigate. Plus, my mom had, and you think about epigenetics, my mom had been in Belfast during World War II. And
Wow.
during and after the war, they never had enough to eat. So she went through periods of really intense hunger. So here I am, her offspring, where there's food abundantly and I can't stop gorging on it,
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. That, yeah, to make that connection, because you were being wired at the DNA level to consume as much food as possible because your mother grew up in such scarcity. Yeah, that's amazing. And I
Right?
can,
So these things affect us. And even when you think about generations of people after the war or after the Depression,
Mm,
people lived lean for a long time, and then all of a sudden there's food. Well, why is everybody gorging themselves? We know that about like cats, like fat cats. Very often, either the mother was starved for a while, or when they were kittens, they were starved for a while, and then it leads to this,
mm,
imbalanced behavior. But anyway, that was where I was at, and I suddenly, well, I started to think that I wanted to maybe be a naturopath.
yeah.
But in order to do that, you have to go to school for, like, I don't know, 12 years or something. And I didn't go to college out of high school. I was one of those people who hated school, just hated it with a passion every single moment that I was in it. Always wanted to be outside, always wanted to be doing something else. Just like, so when I got out of high school, I was like, I'm so done with that scene. Like, I'm not going to college.
Yeah, yeah.
So so the whole naturopathic route was going to involve school that I didn't want to do, but I felt like I needed to do something. So I went to massage therapy school. I left the cafe. I just like bailed on the whole thing, left my family
Mm,
behind, and moved out and started to get healthy. Started to do yoga, started to receive body work, and got healthier and more balanced, and really enjoyed learning body work. And was really convinced I was not ever going back to the restaurant business. But
mm,
then, unfortunately, my mom got diagnosed with a brain tumor, a glioblastoma,
mm.
and she was dead within 6 weeks of being diagnosed. And
Wow.
yeah, I mean, it went really fast because she had a botched surgery. She went into, they rushed her into surgery after they saw the CAT scan, and she went in with just a little bit of a speech impediment and a kind of loss of fine motor skills. And
Mm,
she came out completely unable to speak and completely paralyzed on her left side.
man, that is devastating. Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really, really hard. And my mom was a rock. My mom was like super mom. She was amazing. And she'd been taking care of my handicapped dad
Mm,
for the last, 20 years, because he had 15 years she'd been taking care of him.
oh,
So
wow.
without my mom in the scene, like, I had no choice but to kind of step back into family business and take care of my dad. Now I became a caregiver to my dad and still have a restaurant. But I was pretty determined to, like, have better boundaries,
Yeah.
continue to, pursue my wellness pursuits. And so I just started doing massage on the side, just a few a week with people I knew. And but always reading, right? And I imagine you're like that too. And people who
Yeah.
are listening to this, we like to learn and educate ourselves. And so I don't know I came across a book called, I think it was by John Beaulieu, and it was The Use of Color and Sound in Music in Healing.
Yeah.
And, I read it and it really resonated. And so, of course, I went out, and this was 1996. So I went out and I found like every book I could, and there weren't a lot back then, and was going through them, kind of worked my way through them. And then I got a Gaia catalog in the mail that had a set of tuning forks for healing in it. And also John Beaulieu's Biosonics forks. I'm so grateful for people like John Beaulieu and Jonathan Goldman and the people
Yeah.
who started to lay down these tracks before I came along, because they really gave me something, a platform to work from.
Absolutely, me too. I can,
Yeah.
I can totally get that. I think it was Jonathan Goldman's stuff that I came across first in the world of sound healing. But yeah, please.
Yeah, he's just wonderful, and he's created so much great content, and he's just got a big heart of gold. So, really grateful to have him as a mentor.
Mm,
So in that catalog, I saw these tuning forks, and I was like, oh, look, sound healing. That's what the subject that I'm interested in at the moment. So I ordered them. And I just started playing with them with my few massage clients who were already kind of friends anyway. And they let me have them be my guinea pigs. And, I didn't know what I was doing. The instruction, it came a little instruction book. It was C, D, E, F, G, A, B, the C major scale. And in the little book said you C in the root and D in the sacral and E in the soul, and so on
yeah.
up to the crown. So that's what I started doing, like I'd activate the C and I'd hold it over somebody's root chakra. But I also started like moving it around, I was like, okay, well, what does it sound like right over the chakra? What does it sound like over here? I just started sort of going back and forth over the body. And what I thought was that if I activated the note of C, and an activated tuning fork was going to produce like an objective sound, right? It was just going to sound like a C. I thought it was just going to be like do its thing, right?
Mm,
But what I found as I moved it over the body was that the sound changed. Like, some places it would go really loud, in some places it would go really soft, and I keep striking it, and it would sound like it was like being absorbed. Some places it would just sound like it was full of static. And it was just very peculiar. Some places go really sharp, but I found like wherever I found a place that was atonal, let's say it was really sharp, if I kept on activating it and putting it in that spot, then it would start to settle down and just not sound sharp anymore. And one of the first places I noticed this was somebody had pain in their shoulder. And when I held the fork over, it was sharp. And he was like, wow, he's like, that kind of sounds like it feels like I have sharp pain in there. And the fork sounds like, and
Yeah.
so, I just kept putting there. And after a while, it kind of like sounded like a C again. And he got up off the table and he rotated his arm and he was like, oh my God, all my pain is gone. Right.
Yeah.
And we were both amazed. Like, I didn't know what to expect. Like, they didn't come with any, like, do this and expect that. Do you know what I mean? So it was a complete surprise for both of us. It couldn't be the placebo effect on either one of our parts because neither one of us had a clue what was even going on.
Yeah.
And when I first started telling people about the tonal anomalies, they said to me, I encountered so many skeptics in the beginning. This was a rough road in the very beginning because, especially in Connecticut, I was in Connecticut in the 90s with sound healing. They're like, sound healing?
Yeah.
Bah. I was like,
Yeah. Oh my God.
so people told me that it was room acoustics, that it was the Doppler effect. And I was like, I understand those things. Like, I understand what that is. I said, there's something else going on. There's another signal present. It is not just the Doppler effect. It is not because it's changing in the same place. Like, it's got to be something different going on. And people are having experiences where they're feeling more relaxed. They're experiencing state changes, basically. So things happen, right? So then I got, actually in the beginning, I was very elaborate because it was vibrational medicine, right? That I was studying light, color, music, all of that. And so my first treatment room had a surround sound stereo with a subwoofer under the table. And I had every color, 100-watt light bulb of every color of, the chakras. And so I would, put on the colored light bulb. I'd figure out where people's things were low. I'd pick different selections of music and like bass, lots of good bass. And
Yeah.
and it was a lot of inputs. And people were like, whoa.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And then what happened was the lamp broke. I couldn't find another lamp like it. I had to move my office to a place where I couldn't have the subwoofer under the table. And then I just kind of was just down to tuning forks and just decided to figure out how to be as good with tuning forks, as I possibly could and not take on any other things. And so I ended up doing it as a hobby. And I did it as a hobby, just working over people's bodies for 10 years.
Yeah, right.
A few people a week, just not many. Because quite honestly, like I chafe at the term healer. and I'm not, there's something in the perception, I think it's changed, but for many, many years, it just seemed painfully woo-woo.
Yeah.
Somebody said to me once, she said, of all the woo-woo stuff out there, what you do comes across as the most woo-woo.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's so
like,
harmful. That's really
but I totally get it. And I understood that. And I'd see other people doing sound healing or with tuning forks. And I felt the same way. Whatever it is that, we've got some voice that got instilled in us and perspective on these things that's snide and like,
yeah.
So I didn't want to be the tuning fork lady. I was like, this is not my thing. So we ended up moving to Vermont and I started a kettle corn business. Actually, I had the first organic kettle corn on the market in 2004. You could not buy kettle corn in stores in 2004. You could only get it at fairs and festivals.
Really?
And yeah. And so I'd never even eaten it because whenever I saw it at fairs and festivals, there was always a long line and I just don't like standing in long lines. So I had never even tried it. But I would go to grocery stores on Sunday nights and I'd walk around and I'd see, like what's been hit, what are people buying, what's a market niche that's not filled, and I did months of this research Sunday night at the grocery store, like figuring out. And then it just dawned on me one day. I was like, wow, kettle corn. So I got a kettle and I learned how to pop it. And I came up with I was in Vermont, so maple organic kettle corn. And got it into 50 stores. I was doing it all by hand. Got it into 50 stores. It's flying off the shelves. It's totally addictive. Like people would open the bag and they just eat the whole thing.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
just
yeah.
I kept on restocking it, people. Like, and
Oh,
so I was working on a business plan to automate it, and it was my plan to like take it to that next level, automate it, grow it to a certain level, and then sell it to like Frito-Lay or whatever. And I knew that I had really good timing into the marketplace, that I was like hitting it first, had a proven product, had a good profit margin, like it was proven, like I proved the product. I'm like, gonna get funding for this, gonna make this happen, and then
yeah.
blow it up, pop it up, and then retire.
Yeah.
And so I got derailed from that plan because something happened in my tuning fork hobby that like changed everything. And
Wow.
that was that I discovered, basically I had developed a practice at this point of kind of combing around, finding the loud spots wherever they were hanging out, not in midline, and just bringing them to the midline, and then call what I call columning, process of like kind of combing across and then just stretching it out front, right? And so that's what I did, and people said, they felt more relaxed and whatever, it was good. Uh, but one day I was working with this woman who was complaining that she had pain in her jaw and down her neck and into her shoulder, and like this sense of pulling going on, and it was really uncomfortable, and she'd been to a whole bunch of different kinds of providers and nobody had been able to help. And so she found out about me, and so I'm holding the fork over her, trying to determine if it's loud or sharp or what's going on, in this area. And then all of a sudden, and this is a very odd and fated kind of thing, there was this really loud noise out the window. We were like a strange loud noise. And we lived in a 27-acre meadow in the middle of 93 acres in a mountain in Vermont. So the likelihood of any loud noises, going on out my window was very unusual. So I walked over to the window and I looked out, and I didn't see a thing. So I was like, well, that's curious. And I turned around, and for whatever strange reason, I activated the tuning fork as I was walking towards her. So from about 6 feet away, I was walking towards her, the fork was ringing, and then all of a sudden, right about here, I hit a loud sticky spot.
Hmm.
Like the ones that I found, like, here, I hit it out here. And the fork got louder as it passed through it and kind of slower moving, and then quieter out the other side. And so I went back and I'm like, come back in. I'm like, sure enough, that's one of those loud sticky spots. So for a moment, I was kind of confused about what to do with it. I'm like, what's that? So what do I do with it? But then I sort of realized that I'd been taking these loud sticky spots and moving them in midline, and that had been working out really well. So I call it click, drag, and drop, because it's kind of a funny thing that I can stick the tuning fork like in it, and it's like becomes like I'm picking it like an iron filing's being picked up by a magnet, right? That the tuning fork becomes a magnet, and then I can move it, and you can feel it moving. And then when you get to the midline, it sort of feels like it's sort of being sucked or dropped in. It's sort of an interesting sensation. So that's what I did. I did click, drag, and drop, and I brought the loud spot all the way to the midline and dropped it in. Thought it was kind of weird, but so she called me the next day and she said, Eileen, all of that pain and pulling is gone. It's like gone. And I was pretty astonished. And so the next people who came in, I started with my tuning forks 6-7 feet away. And in the process of combing through the atmosphere around the body with a vibrating tuning fork, I discovered that there was this whole landscape around us hidden in plain view, and that the tuning fork and the overtones and the undertones kind of created an invisible ink decoder that allowed me to sort of sense into this acoustic landscape and start to discover it. So it became this incredible like multi-year process of discovery. I was finding things that felt like walls and channels and eddies and dead zones and like all of these really wild things. And that as I would come into some place that was anomalous or sounded weird, and if I just stayed there just like before, it would harmonize and the stickiness would let go, and then I would just kind of keep going. And what happened, and it took about, I'd say, 4 years for the whole, what I call the Biofield anatomy map to emerge. And I think I realized in the beginning that every time I was working off somebody's left shoulder, that the fork would sound sad. It would sound sad, in the same way that if we were listening to a sad song,
Mm,
we're just like, oh, that just sounds sad, right?
mm.
You just
As
resonate.
a minor third.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and then I noticed in person after person. And then I started discovering that, like, as I was combing through, I work with this concept that I call my mail slot, MAIL slot.
Mm,
And it actually, I always had this feeling like I had this little, like, trap door in the back of my head, and sort of open, and little notes would drop in. And as I was sort of in this early exploration of the field, I'd be combing along and I'd hit a spot, and my mail slot would open, a little note drop in, and it would say something like sadness, age 13. And
mm.
so I would say to the person, did something sad happen when you were 13? Something really sad? And they'd be like, oh, yeah, that's when my grandmother died and we were so close and nobody ever wanted to talk about it. And I wasn't really allowed to cry over it. And,
Mm.
this whole internalized experience of sadness that happened when they were 13. And it was like a memory that was there.
Yeah. Mm.
Right? And so what started to emerge was this picture of, like, our memories, rather than being stored in our brain, like we're told, appear to be stored, like, in these standing waves, like magnetically encoded in standing waves in the atmosphere around our body, like our own personal cloud storage system of everything that ever happened to us.
Mm.
And I started to discover that, just like we all share the same digestive anatomy for the most part, that we all shared the same energy anatomy as well. And that every time we feel a particular emotion, like sadness, we're actually energizing that part of our field. It's not all happening in here, it's happening in our whole bodies.
Mm.
And that when we accumulate a lot of sadness, then that there's mass to that. It has mass. And so it's like sound, and we know that sound waves carry mass and matter, right? That's been determined. So these sound waves of that generated emotional experience sort of trap, almost like water in a way, like, because we evaporate, and any place where there's an electromagnetic tangle, water is going to accumulate. There's a kind of heaviness when people are depressed, and they just have this heaviness over the left shoulder. It's like a cloud, but a tuning fork can come in and be like a cloud buster. You
Yeah.
go in there and break it all up and kind of get it moving, shift it to center, and then all of a sudden you feel lighter and brighter and better.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah.
yeah, so that's a fascinating concept, and it's amazing like how much clinical success you've had with doing that, and how I love how your intuition played such a big role in it. And this speaks to like our current time, how we process everything from a left brain point of view. But there's so much going on in the as the ancients would refer to as the symbolic non-material. There's like this whole other world that exists alongside of us that this other hemisphere of our brain is able to perceive if we allow it. But we've kind of been conditioned to not understand, or to not use that part, and to discount it as being woo-woo or not existing because it's not tangible. But it seems to be very, very, very real. And from what you were explaining, like, yeah, it's amazing.
Well, sound has been used shamanically, obviously, right? In every culture, all over, in different ways. And one of the things, like we were talking about earlier, the sort of infinite overtones and undertones really reveals additional dimensions of reality, in a way that the sound revealed the biofield to me,
Yeah.
and taught me it was like kind of like learning a sonic braille of, like, oh, that vibrational pattern, means this. I started to identify different sounds with different emotions, different experiences. Oh, you moved when you were 14, didn't you? And they're like, how do you know that? I'm like, it's
Yeah.
a language, and I know what that vibration is, because it's the same from person to person. But not only does it sort of reveal this landscape of memories and what is going on in the body's electrical system, which
Yeah.
is something we never learn about. I mean, that's what I really discovered in 2010. In 2008, I ended up going to college. I got very clear direction. Sort of what ended up happening was, after that initial, experience of that woman, and then these other people started coming in, and I started working in the field, I started getting really dramatic therapeutic outcomes, like
Mm.
really dramatic. People getting over anxiety, debilitating anxiety in like 3 sessions, people pain that they'd had for 30 years gone in one session. And it started to dawn on me. I was like, this is the kind of help that people are looking for. You're in discomfort, you go see a provider. You want to have this kind of experience of relief.
Mm.
And I started to feel it was like, that I almost had a sort of an obligation to bring it out into the world. But that felt really sort of tedious to me. I was like, that means that I've got to like go like polish myself up and become a speaker, got to like make it. And I was like, I don't want to do that. Like I was the kind of girl like wearing fleece covered with dog hair, and I didn't care about fashion or makeup or anything like that. Like I never wanted to be like a somebody, right? And I was like, in order to bring this message out, people care about the messenger. And I didn't want to be the messenger, quite frankly.
Mm.
I didn't want to do it. But I got a message through my mail slot one day that wasn't a post-it note. It was like certified mail. Like it was very detailed, and it was very clear and very sort of illuminated, right? You've probably had those moments when you have these ideas that are just kind of lit, right? And you're like, whoa, that's a thing, and I need to do that. And so
Yeah.
it was really clear. It said to me, the world needs harmony more than it needs another snack food.
Yeah.
And you need to go to college, get degrees, learn and teach about sound, advance the science of what you're doing here. You need to cover the globe with this work and awaken an army to help you to do it.
Mm.
And it was just so clear that I couldn't argue with it. I was just like, you're right. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I guess I will. And so it just so happened that there was a college 5 minutes down the dirt road that I lived on in the middle of nowhere in Vermont that had one of the only undergraduate programs in wellness and alternative medicine in the country.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Meant to be. Mm.
Meant to be, right? And so I ended up getting my undergraduate and my graduate degrees and writing a master's thesis in 5 years. It's much better to wait to go as an adult because your time management is much better.
Mm.
And then my master's thesis, and I had an incredibly blessed lineup for my thesis committee that really held me to a very high academic standard. They said, if you're going to be writing academic papers on this subject, it has to be above excellent. And I was, really held to that, and would not have produced something of that quality if I had not had this team that was like, this is going to be good.
Yeah.
So, and then that became the basis for tuning the human biofield.
Yeah. So from that, after you did your master's, you wrote Tuning the Human Biofield.
Yeah, yeah, because if my thesis is actually online for free, I should get you the link so that you
Yeah,
can share
cool.
it.
Yeah.
So the thesis, I had 5 editors help me with that, and it came out super polished. I won an academic excellence award, much to the pleasure of my thesis committee, and so I had a lot of really polished material. And it's funny because I don't know how familiar you are with Intertraditions Publishing, right? That's the
Oh, yeah.
company that, right? And so in my early 20s, I was looking at my bookcase one day, and I realized that a lot of the books that I had were Intertraditions books. They were also Bear and Company as their other imprint. And I remember looking at them and saying to myself, someday I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to have them publish it. And plus, they're in Vermont, and this was when I lived in Connecticut, and I'm like, Vermont's cool. So like, I picked my publisher, years before. So when the thesis was done and I graduated, I was like, okay, now I can write to Intertraditions and have them publish my book.
Wow.
And I sent them a letter, and I was like, hey, I wrote my book and here it is. And they picked it up like right away. They picked it up right away.
That's
Yeah.
so cool. And then, yeah, I love hearing stories like that because it just shows how one thing leads to another, and you're following that intuition and you're, or that soul urge, and then it's just forming, like your whole life just all sort of congregated around you and all supported itself. It's really cool how
Yeah.
the academic team around you held you to such high standard. Do you think it sounds like if you didn't have them, would have you put so much like being so rigorous with the information that you were finding?
No, not at all. I mean, it really I was very fortunate to be supported in my education because I went on to get a master's in education, really small Vermont college, but I had a master's in education and master's in counseling. And so I was able to do kind of an independent track and create my own master's in what I called integrative education. And because I had become so fascinated with plasma, it was really the discovery, kind of these things also converge, like you said, about kind of life lining itself up in a way so that all of this could happen. But as I was puzzling over like what is going on in the field, how am I moving stuff around, having no idea that we had an electrical system,
Mm.
my son came to the dinner table one night and he'd been reading these books on science that I'd given him for his birthday. And he said, "Did you know there's a fourth state of matter called plasma?" And I was like, solid, liquid, gas. No, like somehow I missed an entire state of matter.
Mm.
And so that later that night I went and I started looking and poking around at plasma and it blew my mind. You know, when I started to like understand, and then I discovered electric universe theory, like we were talking about, became good friends with Wal Thornhill, who, really kind of took me under his wing. Whereas, Don Scott was very skeptical about my work. He's just such a rigorous scientist. But Wal really saw, what I was doing. He helped me with my first book and my definitions of plasma and making sure that everything that I was writing was correct as far as he knew. And so then it started to dawn on me that that the body had an electrical system, right? And then it's a bioplasma and that it all started to come together. But I actually did an independent study on plasma. But part of this idea of integrative education was that I wanted to look at the things that connect the disciplines, because as you go up in higher education, everything becomes very siloed. And this is the biggest problem in our culture, if you ask me, is this illusion of separation that especially the use of nouns really gives rise to. Even with like the electromagnetic spectrum separates like X-rays and cosmic rays, but they're all vibrations, right? And so we get like stuck in the words of everything instead of understanding that everything is a process that's connected to everything else. And so part of that right brain, left brain has to do with like the nouning of everything that stops you from being aware. Like apparently the Hopi language has no nouns and it speaks to the fluid, ever-changing nature of reality and that part of the brain. Yeah. So now I forgot what I was telling you.
I'll jump in and I'll just say, like your description earlier of this electrical charge that you were finding in the biofield, or magnetic charge, sorry, as you said. I'm doing a course at the moment about the nervous system, just for my own like personal development, but also because I'm fascinated with the nervous system. But it seems to be like you were finding these traumas or life events, and they were like crystallized or they were stuck in the field, and then you were finding them. From understanding the nervous system a little bit, I can see that it's not so much the event that happens, but it's your reaction to the event within the body, within the nervous system, which creates the electrical charge, which then is storing this information in the field that you're interacting with and loosening up. And because if we're not allowed to express it through conditioning or whatever's happening in our family or whatever, we suppress that urge, and then we become disassociated from it, or whatever your coping mechanism is.
Compartmentalization, which many people do. You just kind of wall it off and carry on, and you kind of project a functional front while you're dragging all of this. Really, what is sound? I mean, it started to occur to me, I'm hitting these loud spots. What are they? They're sound. They're sounds you never made, and from your trauma response. Not like you said, it isn't so much the input as it is how we respond to it, which is usually with tension.
Yeah.
So a freeze, and I'm bracing myself against you screaming at me or hitting me, or I'm bracing myself against this car accident. And so those places where we go into freeze is where the whole electrical system goes frozen. It traps energy, but then it also affects the body, right? So the field is sort of an exploded view of the body, or the body is a compacted view of the field. So anything that's going on in the field is also going on in the body. But from a physics standpoint, magnetic fields guide and inform electric currents. So when we do an adjustment in the field, we're adjusting the way that electricity is flowing through the body. So you can think about pain as too much current in the wires, because you're feeling sad and sad and sad, and your magnetism is piling up and it's drawing electricity over there, and now you have an imbalance. And so when we adjust the field, we adjust the magnetic flow, then the electricity follows. And it's this whole idea of just bringing things into the midline. When we're not in the present moment, when we're worrying about the future, when we're regretting the past, we're taking our energy out of the now in the center of the body. Or if we're reliving a trauma because that part of our field is lighting up, we're not in a regulated, coherent present state. And so that's the aim of sound healing, is to settle down. When we speak of the nervous system, it's interesting because I tend to go rogue and do my own thing with stuff. And so the original definition of the biofield is about the field that surrounds the body. They wanted to, National Institute of Health wanted to give a name to this that wasn't aura or human energy field. And so biomagnetic field, biofield. And what I really found is that you can't separate the magnetic field from the electric current in the body. Like, there's electric current flowing through the body, and there's a magnetic field around that. Even a bar magnet has a toroidal magnetic field around it. And so we have current that's constantly flowing through us, mostly supplied by our breath. And that's our life force, our vitality, our aliveness, right? Our beingness. That when you're alive, your light is on, that current is running. And when you're dead, the light goes out. And so we can't separate the energy that's beating the heart, that's running the brain, that's pumping the blood, that's making all the systems work in the body, from the magnetic field that surrounds it. So I see it as the body's electrical system in its entirety. And it's this electrical system that stores our memories, because if you think about it, everything we see and smell and touch and taste and feel and respond to is an electric impulse in our body. So it would make sense that our memories are stored in our electrical system. And we see evidence of sound waves, standing waves, magnetically coded. Like we already know that nature behaves that way.
Yeah. And thanks for that beautiful description, because I think it was important to maybe revisit that so that people could understand how your electrical system is creating a magnetic field, which is holding information around you. There's a really beautiful concept that I love ancient cultures, and I always refer to ancient cultures as like a reference point for all of these things, because I believe that they knew a lot more than we do now. And that's Wal Thornhill's sort of background as well. David Talbot, they went into the whole all the myth and everything of ancient cultures to understand like real practical physics concepts. And that's what we see that they were doing, is they were giving us symbols and language to address like real scientific processes. And for the person who was the priest or the initiate back then, they understood that, but I guess that knowledge has been sort of lost. So where I was going with this is the Dogon tribe in Africa have a concept of this, like the symbolic non-material, that our whole universe is creating like another magnetic version universe. And they say that the magnetic version of our universe is here all the time. It's like a twin, and we can't live without each other. And it's holding perfect knowledge. To say it has perfect knowledge and no ability to act. But then our realm of physicality, superconductivity, and electricity is the realm where we have ability to act, but we have imperfect knowledge. So to bring it back to what you were saying, it seems like this real knowledge is stored in this magnetic information around us, and we forget, or can't access it, but it takes initiation or initiative to start to heal things. if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even go so far to say, right, we see the biofield, okay, it's the body's electrical system, but I would even say it's the same thing as what we call our soul,
Mm, yes.
because it like it leaves the body when you die.
Mm,
Light can't be destroyed. Like the light, the bubble of light, the spark, God spark that you are,
mm,
it might go back into the one light,
mm.
or it might remain individuated and then come and take on another human suit. So if you believe in reincarnation, then all of the memories of all of your past lives are stored in your biofield.
Yeah.
And not only your soul life, but also your ancestors, because you have the genetic material going all the way back to the origins of life itself, when life started as a fungus. Right?
Mm,
We still have fungus in us. We're still made of fungus. It's just become more complex. And we're mostly water molecules anyway. And
yeah.
so water, it's been the same water all along, right? And
Mm,
the same electricity. So all of the information going back to origins of life are actually within us, both on the level of flesh and bone, and also on the level of the electric juice that powers the flesh and bone. So truly, the knowledge about everything is everywhere around us and in us. This idea of the Akashic records and
mm.
visiting the Akashic records, you don't need to go astral travel to do that. They're within. They're part of the composition of what you are.
Yeah, and that speaks to the idea that the body is just a physical manifestation of the soul, and they're not separate. They interact with each other all the time. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's beautiful.
In this model, the body is inside the mind, right? So the biofield is the mind, the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, the soul,
Mm,
and it's bubble around us. So our body is actually inside of it.
mm.
And the degree of health and balance in your electrical system in its entirety informs the health of the physiology.
Yes. Yeah. No, perfect. I love that. Thanks for defining that. And you were talking about how plasma fits into all of this before. That's where you were
Yeah.
got lost. Um,
Yeah, and I just remembered what it was that I was saying.
cool.
So in this an atmosphere, right, in this water that's all in us and around us, and this electricity that's all in us and around us, the harmonics of the tuning fork, the overtones and undertones, opens up extra dimensions of reality. And this is the shamanic use of sound, where the ancestors appear. And it's that connection to these more subtle realms where you're able to perceive spirit guides or power animals or ancestors. I gave a tuning once when I was in New Zealand. Where are you?
I live about an hour north of Sydney, Australia.
Okay, I
Yeah.
had a feeling you're Australian.
Yeah.
So I was teaching in Australia in where was I? Brisbane.
Brisbane.
And yeah, and there was a woman in the class who's Maori. Is that how you pronounce it? Maori?
Yeah, Maori. I'm actually part Maori, which is interesting. My
Okay.
dad's from New Zealand. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, she was half Maori, and her dad was and her mom was not.
Mhm.
And she was in class and we had about 20 students. And while we're working on her, the feature that is called the ancestral river in the biofield anatomy on her father's side came up, and we were working in that. And it's like part of our biofield that it's a stream. It's about maybe an inch thick, and it runs down either side of our bodies, about 10 inches on either side. And the one on the right side holds the information of the lineage of our father, and you can really read a lot of stuff in there, and then the mother is on the left. And
Mm.
so we were working in the ancestral river, and all of a sudden the room filled with her ancestors,
Wow.
and practically everybody could perceive them.
That's amazing.
Right? So the sound just kind of, it opens up that portal. Even though like I'm a white girl with tuning forks, it's not any different than, someone with a drum or a rattle or chanting and calling in, activating through those overtones and undertones, all those extra dimensions, those finer places where these finer energies that realm.
Yeah.
And so when we were talking about ancestral healing, these ancestors are showing up, and we completed her adjustment, and she sat up in the table and she looked like a queen. Like she had like gathered all of this like regal energy of her ancestors like back into herself and really claimed it, and it was so full of her. And I glanced over and I see all these ancestors, and they bowed to me. All of them bowed to me.
Mm.
Yeah, and I was not the only one that saw it, which was so wild. It was so wild. And in other classes, I've also had this experience where what we call the cool breeze, that all of a sudden there's it gets ionic kind of feeling, when you create an ionized environment, and it'll feel like a cool breeze, and you'll get kind of goosebumps in the sense that ancestors are present, and it's profound. And it's real. It's
Yeah.
real. It's
Yeah.
very
It's absolutely real. And yeah, when you were describing the life and death just before, it's just a change of state. Like you're just changing states of energy and going back to the magnetic universe where we seem to go, like that's how energy works, like the particle and the wave, the electric monopoles oscillating between electricity and magnetism. We're no different. We just oscillate between two states, but from our perception of time here, we experience it linearly and it seems like a long time. But you look at the quantum world that runs 10,000 times faster, you see them popping in and out of existence. They're still existing, but we can either perceive them in physicality or not.
Mhm. Well, or one way, I mean, that's it, coming into sort of like the wave particle thing. Like, what is this that's flashing in and out, right?
Yeah.
And because I don't think that there's any such thing as stuff. Like, I don't think there's any like smallest particles, or when you start talking about quantum stuff, I'm like, well, what do you really mean by quantum? Because if you go look up the definition of the word quantum,
Mm.
do you know what it is?
No, well, not the Wikipedia definition.
Yeah, like the standard kind of like, go look on Google kind. It's very tiny.
Yeah, right. That's it. That's all they say.
So what does that mean? So we're talking about quantum healing and this and that. Like, how does that relate to very tiny? I don't understand. But if it's about like really, really, really high frequencies
Mm. Yeah.
and interactions of very high frequencies, like if it's all about harmonics, you can always go higher. The waveform can always get smaller and smaller and smaller. So these particles are just artifacts of our human perception that slows down reality enough that things appear like things, but they're
Mm.
not. They're just waves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this idea that we're going to get down to the smallest thing, this tiniest quantum thingy, I don't think is so. Because there's always going to be, it's just the nature of infinite reality. Like, well, but that's, you can always add in one more hertz.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
Like,
true. Absolutely. Yeah, no, you're right. It's very tiny. That's so funny. That's quite hilarious. But you're right. It's just another perception that we have, and it's not separate from our experience. It's just a different. I think I've heard people talk about it. It's just a different time, like a different sort of
time
dimension.
scale. Or because it's so small and so fast. So it's a completely different time scale than like what an elephant or a big whale experiences, right? As a time scale. Or trees. I had a really interesting experience talking to a tree.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a friend of mine. Were out for a walk, and this sort of gaggle. We were in a park, and a gaggle of noisy, highly scented humans walked past us.
Yeah.
And my friend said, "I wonder what trees think of humans." And I said, "Well, let's ask." So we both went over to a biggish tree, and we put our hands on the tree, and we asked it what it thought of humans. And what was funny was that like the first response I got was like kind of like a snarky projection of my own mind. But then I realized, no, the tree would not talk to me that way. So I just listened more deeply. And the tree communicated to me kind of in pictures, and it showed me about how it didn't differentiate itself from like all the trees that had come before it, because it was all one organism, fall over and a new one. And so it was connected both backwards and forwards in time to its treeness.
Yeah.
Right? it was ancient, even though the tree itself was only, I don't know, 30, 40 years old.
Yeah.
But its consciousness was connected all through that. So its sense of time was much longer. So it was kind of showed me like a human walking underneath me is the tiniest blip of insignificance.
Yeah. Cool.
Right. And so then after I was like, oh wow, I kind of had this whole like opening into the consciousness. I've like mind melded with the tree to the best of my ability as a limited human.
Yeah.
And then I pulled my hand away and I opened my eyes, and in the exact same moment, my friend did the same thing. And I was like, what was your experience? And she said, well, at first I heard this snarky voice and I realized it was my own projection. So I listened deeper. I was like, me too.
Yeah.
And then she explained the exact same thing to me,
Wow.
that, the sense of it. And then she said, well, why don't we as humans have that connection to our ancestors through time? Like I feel individuated, but the
Mm.
tree was not individuated.
Yeah. That's Yeah, that's. Do you think that's the human condition, like stepping in, like this extra layer of complex, uh, this I don't know. It's like this extra layer of like interference, or it's like a test. We have an extra layer of test, if that makes sense, as we come into this experience that says we have to forget all of that and try and remember it throughout our life. Mm.
I think that that's a really good way to frame it, because what I'm seeing more and more and more in myself, I guess, in my own evolution of working with people, it's been 27 years now that I've been doing this work. And every time you give a tune-up to somebody, you receive a tune-up. It's not like a massage, like you're giving a massage, you're not getting anything except sore back or whatever.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
when you give a tune-up, you get to see into people's souls, and people's souls are incredibly beautiful. Everybody is like amazing and great. So it's just such a gift to be welcome and to like see the beauty that is in someone. And I see how like the ego and the pain body become like restrictions and shadows, and like governors of our perception of self. And as those areas of resistance, stories of not worthy, old traumas resolve, they alchemize into light, and then there's an experience of expansion. And we're able to expand into the remembering
yeah,
of our illuminated, brilliant, evolved souls. Like we get access to that state of expansion, which in a way is like what the shaman does, the hollow bone. You go into that expansion, right? That communication with all of those aspects of the realm. But in ordinary reality, you don't. You're like, oh, this problem and that person, and oh, I shouldn't have eaten that, and like all of this sort of like ordinary reality that keeps us trapped in our pain bodies, keeps us trapped in this sort of illusion of the small self, when really like we're stars. We're like amazing massive beings squeezed into these tiny forgetting bodies, that then we have to like try to like play the game and figure out like, what am I really,
yeah.
and how can I become that, and how do I heal what's in the way of me doing that, right? And that's really been my journey. I mean, this whole thing has just really been all about me healing me. As I figured stuff out, I've been like, oh, I'm gonna help
Yeah,
you.
but as you heal you, like if you are everyone and you are the collective, you heal everything by healing yourself. So it's not
Exactly.
selfish. It's not selfish
That's
at
right.
all.
And that's what I always tell people. Like, it's absolutely not selfish of you to be healing you because of exactly what you just said.
Yeah, and I think um some people have experienced a lot of trauma in their life, and I think that goes to show like the mission that they wanted to come in with. Like they took a huge chunk for the rest of us, and that's a beautiful thing, I love that
Well,
story you shared about the woman in Australia with and all their ancestors. That's incredible. Hmm.
I know it was incredible. And it's moments like that, the magic. Because that's another part of, these parts of ourselves that we're missing, or the smallness, is that, we lose the magic. And I really feel like I've really observed something interesting as a person doing this work over decades, is that For many years, I had an office in downtown Johnson, Vermont, up above a bookstore. No sign on the door, never advertised. Tiny town, 3,000 people, poor, rural, middle of nowhere, conservative.
Mm.
And somehow people would walk into my office door and basically say to me, I'm here to heal my ancestral line. And
Mm.
I'd be like, well, you found me, but that's what's going on in here. So I'm on in. Because this work really does, in this tapping into, because we are all in this generation, these people like you and me who are curious about this and doing this healing, there's a kind of programming towards, wow, that there was a huge mess that came before me. There's all this trauma, generations of trauma. Many people are down line of addiction and abuse and poverty consciousness and disease and all kinds of stuff, especially bad interpersonal relations, especially between mates. I mean, how many people's parents lived in harmony? Like, no.
Not in
How
the
many
last
people's
12,000 years. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it really has not been going on. And so for whatever reason, there are a group of people, and really, I'd say hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, who definitely incarnated now to
Mm.
do the heavy lifting of the deep ancestral healing and pattern interrupting and self-realization, because the resources are available now. And part of my own being guided to help provide these resources is because there's people here who need them,
Mm.
and who and I like to tell people that if you're doing the work of personal healing, you're not just healing yourself. You're healing all the mess that came before you and the mess that's here now. And for you to think that, like, why aren't I healed yet? Or like, it's because it's a huge mess.
Yeah.
But things are getting lighter and easier
Yeah.
in the collective. Healing is happening faster. It's happening more dramatically. I'm working with people just one session and the pain body's like dissolving and they're like going back and like being like, wow, I feel like my expanded self. I'm like, because I'm really seeing what's happening. I'm like, this is just what's happening. We just need to relax that. And then poof, you expand into you. And it's what used to take me 6, 10 sessions to do is happening in one. And
Wow.
it's really amazing. Yeah.
There's something going on with our current time we're in, and I think most people in these circles are fully aware of like the time that we're in and how important it is and why things are speeding up. But yeah, it's I love where this has gone. I didn't expect it to go in this direction, but I'll share with you a kind of story with ancestry that I had, where I did a ayahuasca ceremony at the start of 2021, and it all starts with the ayahuasca ceremony. And like my experience during that was quite blissful, and I really got to experience like my higher self as opposed to like my programmed self, and there was this real separation between the two, and I kept going between the two because I think it was trying to teach me like this is you that exists without all of this, like to put it in a nutshell. But after that, I had because of the way the DMT works in the system and it resets the endocrine system and everything. I'm sure you know about that. But I actually had a kidney stone move out the day after, and that
Mhm.
was horrifically painful. But what was interesting about that is that I was like, this is some sort of trauma that's being released from my system, in like it's been calcified, and I was aware of that. And then months and months later, I started to have like these weird visions and dreams about war, and I was like, what's going on? It's really strange. And I went to a lady who does amazing readings, and she's an energy worker, and she kind of like guided me through. And then after that session, I could fully remember dying on a battlefield in France. It was that specific, and getting cut through this left side of myself into the left kidney. And that was just blew my mind. It freaked me out a little bit too, because I was like, holy hell, like I'm still carrying that trauma. And then it like physically moved. It was like physically here in this life, and then I had this conscious recollection months, like 6 to 8 months afterwards. So yeah, it's crazy. It's really,
Yeah, we call those etheric artifacts because they're definitely things that I found in people. I've found nooses around necks, chains around ankles, javelins in knees, definitely stakes in people's backs. I mean, really kind of wild stuff that those instruments of death and suffering imprint themselves on in the soul very deeply
yeah,
and can create physical issues in this lifetime. Yeah,
yeah.
pretty wild stuff.
It is wild. um, how much more time do you have, Eileen? Because we can wrap up soon if you need to. Or
I could probably go another 15 or 20 minutes.
yeah, cool. Um, I think where we were landing before, is there anything more you wanted to say about plasma and ether and how that interacts with the human biofield, and just the electrical nature of the human body? I think I know John Stuart Reid does a lot of has a lot of research in how the physiology reacts to sound. And you were talking about sub-frequencies before, and I think one of his studies showed that sub-frequencies really invigorated red blood cells, which was quite amazing, like by a lot. Is there any other physiological things that you wanted to share about sound in the body?
Well, just kind of speaking to plasma and the body's electrical system and the revelation that occurred when it started to dawn on me what was going on.
Mm.
Because I would say that I became a seeker when I was 18, and that started not with ayahuasca, but with LSD, which pretty much like blew my mind wide open.
Yeah, yeah.
And and really, I had a very very expanded experience. I was like, wow, I'm enlightened and I'm going to be enlightened for the rest of my life. And it was like I kind of took an express elevator to the top of the mountain and thought I was going to stay there, and of course I didn't. Like, I crashed down the next day and I was like, wow, I'm 18, I'm bulimic, I'm a really messed up American girl, but I just tasted the top of the mountain, and now I have kind of a north star of where I need to get to, right? And I realize that I'm going to have to like switch back it for a long time, but I know where I'm going, right? I know what's possible here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And,
totally.
yeah. And so I've read a lot of books. I did a lot of self-help. And by the time I got to be, I don't know, in my late 30s, right? I think that I had spent a ton of money. Like, I'd gone down a 65-foot firewalk with Tony Robbins, and I'd had all this body work, and I'd read all these books, and I'd done all these Nightingale Conant CD box set programs, but I was still overweight, had constant low grade pain, was always fighting with my husband, was broke, was in debt. Like, I wasn't fit and content and successful. I read all of these books on like abundance and money, and yet still had this low level bleh going on. I was like, I still haven't found it. Like, I still haven't figured it out. Like, I was still a seeker. I was still reading the books. But then when I discovered plasma, and then I started to realize that like my body had an electrical system, right? Because before the LSD, one time, I think when I was 17, I decided to see what would happen if I smoked as much weed as I possibly could, because I'm always the scientist, right? And so I went off with like a handful of joints, probably a swag back then, and and I went out in the woods and I like smoked till like I could not smoke anymore. And then I was laying down, and all of a sudden I had this experience of like inner illumination. I was like totally lit up inside. And I was like, wow, I was like full of light. Like, am I Jesus Christ?
Yeah, yeah.
Because I didn't have any other framework to attach that experience of inner illumination to except a religious framework.
Yes.
And so I realized that I grew up, like I had grown into this sort of like spiritual notion that like all is one. And yet my right brain or my left brain or whatever the heck the boxed in one is, had been told that everything was separate, that they can't reconcile the forces of nature. Everything is like tiny units of stuff. It was all separate.
Mm.
and dark, quite frankly, right? Big bang, there was like nothing, and then it exploded, and now it's random, and it's, and there's dark energy and dark matter and black holes, and everything is very like dark and separate and quite frankly depressing, right? It's sort of like I'm in the rock in the middle of nowhere and nobody can hear me scream because sound doesn't travel through space. And like, this is all really like ice. It's a very dark,
Yeah.
depressing cosmology, right? There's like only entropy. It's
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
going down.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
wait. And so as I discovered electric universe and I discovered the electrical system, I realized that I had found the light that I was looking for, and it was scientific.
Mm. Yeah.
That the light was in within was my electrical system, and that it was the same light that like powered the sun and the stars and like the whole environment, that like everything was electric, everything was illuminated. I was illuminated, and I didn't have to be Jesus Christ. I could be just me with an
Didn't have
electrical.
to smoke 20 joints.
Exactly. It's just like this knowingness. And I remember feeling one day like the song of the universe was ringing in my cells, that light, that sound, that music of the spheres, it was like all connected and illuminated and ringing.
Mm.
And I was like, this is what I've been looking for. It's been in me all along, but it's been hidden.
Yeah.
It's been hidden. You don't learn about plasma, you don't learn about ether, like the light, the connectivity. Oh no, we're not going to teach them about that.
Yeah.
And so once electric universe sunk in, once the body's electrical system sunk in, I was like, I don't need to be a seeker anymore. Like I found the light, and it is within, and it is biological and spiritual.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. And that is the marriage of spirituality and science that we are starting to remember now.
Right there. I mean, right there. It's just right there, and it's so simple.
Yeah.
It's so simple. There is no division.
No, no, there's not. And yeah, the ancients knew it. And if we start to listen to that, to what they were really leaving for us, we will fully remember. And I think we will. Like it just seems like this fully accelerated rate of remembering happening at the moment.
There really, really is an accelerated ray of remembering. It's just happening, and it's wild to witness. And I feel like, I don't know if you follow astrology or anything. By the time
Absolutely.
this
Yeah.
airs, but we've just been through, and we're here in January, the end of January 2023, and we've just been through some really interesting
Yeah.
changes in the astrology, right? Transits and things changing houses, and this sense that things are speeding up, and that it's kind of like a whole new world. And I really feel that. And
Yeah.
like everybody I know kind of says and feels the same way, even if they don't follow astrology. They're like, wow, it's like the whole different rhythm of what
Yeah.
we're going.
Yeah. I can genuinely feel changes in the density of like the densities, like just from like 3 years ago. I guess from like the start of COVID was very intense, and then as we've gone past that, it's just been getting lighter, and it feels that way. It feels like the way we move through life feels lighter, if that makes sense.
Well, and there are there are people who claim that and I don't know about the whole cosmology thing and like the whole nature of the realm.
Mm.
I'm actually in a think tank with a group of the smartest people I know, the biggest brains, the most like rigorous researchers
Mm.
who don't believe in the spinning ball theory.
Yeah, right. Mm. So what camp does that put them in? Or in the simulation theory camp or the flat earth?
No, in the flat earth community.
Yeah,
And
wow.
which is really interesting. When I got invited to join this think tank, they had to confess to me that they were all flat earthers. And I was like, nobody gets made more fun of than the flat earthers. Like, it's even worse than those of us who believe in like biofields. Like they give
Yeah,
me a hard time. They're like, if I'm like a biofield flat earther, like forget about it.
yeah,
But then I thought about that, and I don't fall one way or the other. If I don't, I'm one of those people like I need to know something to say that I believe it. You know what I mean? Like I need to go up
yeah.
and like all down and figure it out for myself before I would ever claim to believe anything. Right?
True. Hmm.
Yeah, that's just how I roll as a scientist. But
Yeah.
but part of the argument for that is that our perception tells us it's flat.
Mm, yeah.
And what the spinning ball model does is it tells you can't trust your perception.
True. True.
And we're enculturated from a very early age with misinformation that maybe as a kid our bullshit meter is going, I don't know about this, but then we're told by the authorities that we can't trust our senses and that you have to listen to authorities. And
Mm,
so what I discovered as a teacher teaching people subtle perception
mm,
is that most people have been divorced from their ability to trust and believe in themselves.
yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Like I've experienced that, and it's still there.
Yeah.
I think we all still are recovering from that.
Yeah. And so this is a big part of healing
Mm,
is learning to be your own inner authority and to trust yourself and
mm.
to not keep giving the power away, especially to medical authorities, to like tell you what to do. Like my doctor put me on this drug.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
while you're giving away your own sovereignty and your own the fact that the body heals itself. Like when
Yeah.
I do tune up on somebody, like I just did one this afternoon with a woman, and I said, "Listen, I'm not healing you. All I'm doing is holding up like a mirror and a metronome to your electrical system. It's perceiving how it's out of order, and it's putting itself back in order. Your body is healing itself." And
Mm,
you and I are watching that happen because that's what the body does. It heals itself.
yeah. Yeah. It's just you just have to encourage it, and then well, yeah, you have to encourage the mind, the field to remember or to release that experience. Mm,
Exactly. To remember what harmony and balance sounds like and to relax the whatever trauma reaction was
yeah.
held. And it's just about getting it to relax. So the only claim that I make with biofield tuning is that we help people to relax.
Mm,
That's it.
yeah.
Because pretty much almost everything, any ailment that you can think of is actually tension
Tension.
based.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a very simple way to look at it. Like that's a much nicer way to think about it, because we make things so complex and we think it's like we have to do all these crazy things, but it really is, like you were saying, just being intentional about where we relax, I guess.
Right. And so many, like you said earlier, when you have these subconscious things that you disconnect from, you don't even realize that you're holding tension, but it's throwing off your digestion or it's throwing off your balance. And now you have a pain in your hip and, you don't realize that that's all related to unexpressed emotional
Mm,
sounds that are stuck in your field.
yeah. And in somatic experiencing, like Peter Levine's work, and the course I'm doing is with a lady named Irene Lyon. She was worked with Peter Levine. Yeah, they say that when trauma is ready to be released, naturally, the body will manifest like extreme tension somewhere, as to say, hey, it's time to address this, you know? Mm.
Yeah, and that those are all gifts, right? I mean, any kind of health issue that you get, or even injuries or accidents, are actually invitations to deeper healing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and gifts, really. I crashed my Ninja motorcycle into the pavement going
I
50
saw
miles
this.
an hour.
Yeah, that was recent. Yeah.
It was July 2nd in 2022.
Wow.
And somehow managed to slam into the pavement, have the bike land on top of me, and then roll 40 feet down the road and then land in a ditch. And the only thing that broke was the outside of my left ankle. Like I didn't, even though I like hit the ground really hard on my left side, I pretty much bounced, which was kind of amazing.
Mm,
Um, but the only health issue that I had at the time was a scaly rash on the outside of my left foot. It was like everything else was like running really good, and I knew that that was a sign that there was something amiss in my field down there, and that it needed attention. But I was willing to live with it because it was just a small thing, right? And what I've observed in many, pretty much every person I've ever worked on who had some kind of injury or accident, what might appear like a random place for you to get hurt is actually where the field is the weakest.
yeah.
Wherever the field has the most imbalance, right? If the field is strong, then the body will stay strong. But any place where you're out of balance, like let's say you're always taking care of other people, you're always in this sort of imbalance off the right shoulder and you go out hiking and you fall, that's where you're going to hurt yourself because that's where you have the imbalance. So that's your body telling you there's an imbalance going on here. Like we need to get this sorted out.
Very
And
interesting.
yeah, and so in my left foot, the left foot relates to being stuck or mired in a toxic or difficult situation and kind of learning to put up with it.
Mm,
As a kid, if you're stuck in something that's hell, there's not much you can do except like learn to disassociate or, what have you, right?
yeah.
And so I grew up as a sensitive kid in a difficult circumstances and had a lot of trauma responses and really had felt like on this healing journey, through the biofield, it's kind of like an excavation. It's sort of like an archaeological dig of like finding these soul fragments that you lost that are still frozen in that trauma response and just
Yeah.
bringing them back to now, right? Discharging that memory, bringing, so it's a process of the more tuning you receive, the more whole you become.
Yeah.
But I still felt like I was missing like this sort of key middle piece, even all the healing I've done. And having that accident gave me the opportunity. And basically, like I had to stop to go back and pick up that part of myself.
Yeah.
And so I got a whole bunch more tunings, I did a whole bunch more healing, and through the process of rehabilitating my ankle, finally found that missing piece
Wow.
and was able to integrate it, and it tied into my singing voice because I'd been on a journey since I was 20 to feel like I could just be my own natural singer, but always felt like the wherever I'm supposed to be singing from, that middle bit is gone. And so really that accident was a gift. It was my body's way of saying, we need to do healing in this area. And I felt like, wow, I've been on this healing journey for such a long time. Who knew that I had to crash my ninja, to like get the last piece in the
So
puzzle?
dramatic.
That's what it gave me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's yeah. I love that you gave us that example. I'll ask you one more thing and then we'll wrap it up. A few weeks ago, just on the note of you sharing an injury, I fell off my surfboard and it came around and smacked me in the mouth, and I actually had stitches all here. It's healed now, and you can hardly see anything. It looks great, but from your interpretation, what do you think would be around this area that it's trying to bring my attention to? Maybe.
Well, so that's your right side, right?
Yeah. Right side.
So in the biofield anatomy, we hit a couple different zones. So one of them is right about here. And this piles up when you are fighting with somebody, when you're arguing, when you're engaged in attack and defense, and they're not listening, it's not landing, rah, right? Somebody's not listening, you're not getting through.
Yeah.
When you get in closer to like this area, right? You're getting into the zone of not listening to yourself.
Mm.
So I would say that there's some kind of message coming through. Conscience is saying, do this or step into this role or this power or this expanded part of yourself or whatever. And you're not listening to yourself to the
Mm.
point where you kind of got to get smacked in the head in order to be like, okay, what am I not listening to? What am I not saying yes to? What nudge from my conscience or nudge from the universe am I not listening to, responding to, and acting on?
Mm.
Does that
Yeah.
make you think of anything?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's dropped in because that's why I started doing this nervous system course. Because I felt like I wasn't listening to the cues of my nervous system being in stress. And I need to be far more in tune with that, and realize like what's happening all the time is just a perception of my nervous system, the electrical system, and trying to be far more in tune with that, and compassionate to it.
Yeah, and that's the secret to health right there.
Yeah, being in tune with the body and self-compassion.
totally self-compassionate, and that's a hard thing for a lot of people, because a lot of people are happy to engage their free won't as opposed to
Yeah.
their free will, right? And so that's when your conscience is covered in your body and it's like, hey, I need this. That's the voice of health. That's the path of health. And if you're disregarding it, it's gonna show up. And that you got smacked in that right in that spot in the biofield anatomy.
Cool. Oh, thanks so much. Thanks so much for for illuminating that for me. And yeah, there's more to unpack there. But thanks so much for joining me, Eileen. And do you want to just list where people can find you and work with you, and social media and all that kind of stuff?
So we have a couple websites, biofieldtuning.com and also biofieldtuningstore.com. So I created a line of tuning forks and tuning fork accessories, really high quality American made
I have
tools.
that.
Yeah, and I'm really picky, so they're made to super exacting standards.
Yeah.
We have practitioners all over the world. They're all trained to do distance sessions. So if somebody wants to try a session with a practitioner, they could. I'm available for a very limited number of appointments, but the general information at biofieldtuning.com, if you've got any, is just info@biofieldtuning.com for any kind of inquiries. We have a certificate training program that's all online. You can learn about that there. And I've also created a lot of recordings of tuning fork sessions, like adjustments that are like meditations that you listen to, sort of a combination of receiving a biofield tuning session, coaching, and education. So it's like education about the biofield, but it's also, I've learned so much from this work, working with people and getting inside so many people's minds and understanding like the imbalances of mind and body and emotions. And it's really been such a gift to see the human mind from this perspective. So there's just a whole lot of information for, physical, emotional, energy things. There's a bunch of free ones. I also have a YouTube channel. It's YouTube, Eileen Day McKusick. And currently, and I don't know if I'll still be doing this when this airs, but I started doing regular broadcasts every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. So I do a live talk with tuning, and it's a Sunday morning thing, so it's kind of spiritual, but I'm also scientific, and it's not really, it's just a way to kind of talk about being human.
Yeah, cool. That's beautiful.
Yeah, you can check those out.
And then what's your handle on Instagram and things like that as well? It's
Well, there's two again. There's Biofield Tuning on Instagram, and then there's just me, Eileen McKusick, on Instagram.
Yeah.
And Facebook, same thing.
Yeah.
And I can't quite get into Twitter. I'm a Twitter lurker, but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't post.
Not on
And
TikTok yet.
no, and I'm not on TikTok. I've been resisting that. I don't know, I'm a little too old for that.
Yeah. Oh my. I don't
And
remember.
wait, but there's one more. Oh, I have two books, right? Tuning the Human Biofield and Electric Body, Electric Health, and they're both on Audible.
Yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned those sooner. But yeah, they're both I have both of them and they're both amazing. So thank you so much for the work you're doing, Eileen. It's extremely powerful, and you're extremely powerful, and yeah, it's just so needed in the world today. And I think people are going to get a lot from this episode. So thank you, and we'll have to do it again soon.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.